Yeah, if you have honors stuff, that's fine. So I know there's I was kind of interested in what people thought about our experience levels with coding because I know it was kind of a switch, last class. Did it feel good? Did it was it like comfortable? You understood it? Kind of the workflow of how to read code and think about what's doing, change it. Does that make sense?
It was all right, Professor. It was pretty useful actually, especially to me because those I was one who asked about it. I actually have a one bug with the carding, like the jump feature we were working on, but I can go over it in office hours because I know we have a very little time today.
Um, what in general? Well, for class today, I'm gonna look at the karting game and the overview because we kind of did a deep dive. We didn't just look at it.
Oh, okay.
The bigger part of the bigger idea of what's going on with it. What were you as your issue?
Oh, well, when you, I noticed that when you jump and then you hold the forward button, but you release the jump button, you continue to hop, and you can't lose control of your cart.
All right, let me take a quick look. So I gotta get Unity's turned off. All right. I mean, if that's the case. It's just while you're jumping. I'll probably just kill the forward input. So you're saying while you're jumping,
So just hold forward and don't jump after the initial jump, and you'll keep hopping.
I let go of the jump.
Okay, I did uh I put a modifier on the falling vector that we were going over when we tested out and we decided not to use it. I kept that but didn't apply it to y-axis, and I had that hopping issue. So maybe I just need to do that.
So so if you jump and release jump and keep holding forward, it
Yeah, it just
goes.
you keep hopping in my own game, so I'm gonna go
Well,
check.
when
I'm
you
gonna go double
debug,
check it in a second.
so yeah, I would just go back to my comment out that part, make sure that my code does because I release jump while I'm in the air and I don't keep jumping. I just act as a normal jump.
All right.
But yeah, check it out and try to find where the code is broken. We could talk about it later in class. But I want to just give an overview of the karting game. Um, and just because I kind of spent a lot of time with the first person shooter, and then I kind of started digging in to an area, a little deeper area that a student was interested in, and I realized that kind of just jumped into the karting game and didn't just kind of talk about it in a nutshell. So let me just move these little panels down. So in the project view, it's probably going to be very similar to first person shooter. If I close this up, we have karting, the machine learning agents, we have the mod assets that were used as the base assets for all these micro games. Scenes you can ignore. It's just like sample scene that comes with every project. Xmas Pro is just a package that's now native with Unity. It just makes for better quality text. So it looks like everything's in karting. And if I look at the next level here, we have a nice breakdown of our animations, player controller. We got all the art, fonts, materials, models, post processing. Okay. All the audio tracks, a modular track kit. So that if you wanted to build a new track out, in fact, it's kind of like not connected there and there unless it's like up in the air. No, it's on the ground. Looks like you could just, these are prefabs you can drop in and build out one track. The materials, I should probably talk real quick that these materials and these models get built together along with other, if I click on this prefab here, um, let's see, we have the model, we have the material, and besides that, we also have a collider. I just want to see if there's any scripts on it. Doesn't look it. Okay. So physics materials. So um, physics actors, which normally have some type of collider or rigid body or something on them, they have like a default physics properties, and you can change them by adding physics materials. So just there's a different idea of a material, which is for visual settings, and this idea of a physics material, which is actually change the physical properties of this object. In this case, we're dealing with friction and bounciness, and it looks like the cart and the wheels and crash objects all have kind of different physics objects on them. And so here's a big prefab is usually big. You have a lot of stuff in here. Usually it looks like all the environment, the other players in the game, props. So you might be able to find some stuff in here, UI that you want to reuse, and or VFX. So you got an intro menu, main and lose and win. And remember, these are either lighting or, in this case, machine learning training scenes information. Scriptable objects are really interesting. Scriptable objects are like, so if you click on something up here, and so your scripts, the first step in like making things a lot more convenient for yourself and other developers to work in your project is notice how these scripts, so even if it's coming from Unity, it is still just a C# script behind the scenes, or a C++, but in either case, notice that this component is still a script, and there's a lot of um, variables or properties that are exposed out through the inspector. So that's the first step. Let me see if the script, if I go all the way to the top, things like public variables are, that's in, so I'm going to struct. No, these have tooltips, so these must be exposed through the inspector because they have tooltips and ranges that they can. So let me click on the cart. Yeah, what was this one dealing with? Top speed. Okay, base stats, and then you go into there. So it's like stats. It's serializable, so it can be the whole thing can be exposed out to the inspector. But notice how all these variables or properties are exposed right here. And some of them have a slider acceleration curve, like this one here. This little tag that says give it a range of 0.2 to 1. That makes it into a slider. So we're starting to build a UI in the inspector that's meant for other developers to do a lot of quick tweaking because we don't know what the final setting should be for an optimal play experience. So this is the first step of making like a lot of reuse and an easier gaming project. The next step are something new that we've come up with, this idea of scriptable objects. And what they are is they're a script that if I say if I click edit script, okay. So this one just happens to be called pool object definition, and notice it's inheriting from scriptable objects and not mono behavior. So scripts that are components that get placed onto game objects that give it all this great modifiable functionality that we can script up are inheriting from mono behavior that, among other things, give it the ability to release a component or be able to be attached onto game objects. So everything here is a script or a section of code. This is a C# script. This is, you know, more, and this is a game object up here, which is also just a script or a section of code. And then we make our games underneath this design of entity component. An entity can have components. It's an easy way to think about building parts of your game. Now, a new let me switch to the objective. I think it's objective toast. I'm trying to find something that time does. I'm looking up here. They're all very similar properties, I suppose, but I'm just going to do this one. So they're inherited from scriptable objects, not mono behavior. And then what you do is usually you create a bunch of variables or structs. Um, in this case, there's a method here that's doing some work for us. But basically, what this stuff does is it allows um, yourself or other people on your team to then define up, like you can change these settings. And it's a way to just separate parts of your game, like config files and settings, what have you, that aren't like connected up in a game scene or parts of your game that are more universal. Like you can go out and reference these scriptable objects at any point in the game and use their settings in your code. And so anyway, that's what scriptable objects are called, assets. And when you create, there's a lot of tutorials on this, but notice here it says menu name pool object, pool/object. So if we come up to, let's see, oh yeah, assets create, see all these tutorials, see pool and object and cart game. So notice how like I can go up here and I have this nice custom menu that myself or others on my team can use. And I can hunt around and be like, oh yeah, I want to make a scriptable object of this type. And it's easy to find, identify, and you can click it and create it, and it'll create one for you. See new pool definition object. So I'm just going to delete that. But the point is that they're down in your project. They're a file. They don't live in memory up here, up in the hierarchy. They're are written to disk. So they have kind of, it's a permanent way to like write out a bunch of config and settings that you don't want to be living in a small part of your scene. Like you want a more universal area to make config files. And that's what these scriptable objects are. And then all our scripts, which is going to be a big area as well. So all the functionality. And then timelines. And so remember, I was kind of talking about Cinema Machine and a lot of like scriptable, like pre-recorded parts that aren't really code driven, not really interactable. It's more just like animation driven. That's what these timelines are. And then there's these tutorials that just like just like this over here, just like in first person shooter, this like custom tutorial window. So anyway, that's what's happening inside carding. So if we jump into the scenes, we got our intro scene. So this probably is sharing a lot of functionality with first person shooter. We got our main scene. We got our lose, just a UI and a win. And lose and win looks like it all has the same functionality. Just this could actually be just one Unity scene. Then you could pass in a variable saying if they win or lose, and just swap out the texture. But they chose to do it in two parts. So if we come up to build settings, we got our intro menu, our main scene, our lose, and our win. And they're all turned on. They're all dragged in here, and they're all turned on because they're all part of our build. All right. And yeah, so control. So the intro scene is, I kind of went over all the parts of it in first person shooter. So let me go back to the main scene. Unless there's any questions at the minute. So I'll zoom out a little bit. Just to, like it's good to just get a big, broad view of what's happening before we kind of zoom in. So it looks like we have our game world, and we zoom in more. We have the car, and you can see how the clouds are placed around so that they kind of give that feeling of depth, like they're at different distances as you're driving around. They're going to move at different speeds around you. Then we just have our game world, and there's these mountains here. usually it's pretty standard. It prevents you from, if even if you get off the track, you can never leave the game world in these mountains would stop you, or the timer would run out. But if there's a chance, you just put like a kill zone underneath um, a collider region that if the player enters it, you just kill them. So up here we have our UI for the game. It's screen based, that's why it's large over on the side. And this big pyramid shape is the fulcrum of the camera, the game camera, what the player sees essentially. And then we have this skybox. If you remember, that was so you have setting this lighting settings, but over in environment and skybox. So here's a skybox. This is this image. In this case, this looks like a big cube map. I can tell that there's like kind of this angled cut here and here, and so instead of like a big sphere wrapped around everything, you can also have like a big cube. It looks like it's just a big cube because it's meant to be very stylized and cartoony. In fact, I click on it. Here's the front, back, left, right. Here's all the different sides. So an artist just made all these. You just connect them up, and you get a big cube around you. And just to show you, here you can rotate it, and just see it's this big object around us. All right, so as I zoom in, it looks like even the sun is just this image. Yep. It's just a flat image that's billboarded toward the user. So now we have the game manager, the event system that comes with the UI, the background music, main camera. That interesting. It's got an audio listener. It's got the cinema machine. So this cinema machine is like drives animations and cameras. So I'm thinking it must somehow drive the camera. Post processing is just like make it look really good in different ways. Um, but this camera, I'm guessing, is going to be driven. Yeah. Okay. So here's the virtual. This virtual camera is the connection from the player to the main camera, our viewpoint. So for whatever reason, they're using this type of camera system instead of just parenting the camera underneath the player. Pros and cons, and this team decided to do it this way. So the connection point here, this virtual camera here, is saying follow the transform of the player and always look at the the capsule collider, which for whatever reason just to transform on that. So that's underneath the player here. So we're looking at different transform that are all part of the player for whatever reason. And I'm guessing they pulled the camera off because they don't want it to follow. There's like, I guess if you hit into stuff, or if you want to, I guess there's a lot of like fun cinematic movements with the camera if you're doing um, I guess yeah, I had the virtual camera selected. It was like changing regions on it. I don't know what it's doing, but anyway, I think as maybe you're driving on laps, or if you're hitting different collisions, the camera has different logic on how it acts with you. So I'm guessing that's right, separate it out. And maybe during win or loss conditions, or maybe as you go through a lap, whatever the script logic is, but maybe it does different things to make more of an exciting, exaggerated part. But during basic gameplay right now, just to me, it just seems like it's just following the player. So I haven't, just passed a checkpoint. Nothing really. So maybe like when the end of the race, they kind of do that thing where the camera kind of flies out and you see all the racers like still zooming around. Maybe that's the point of it. But in either case, the camera is separated out from the player and controlled through this virtual camera. Then we have the player, which we were dealing with a lot at the root here. Got the rigid body. This main script is what I was messing with. Some animations for the wheels, and that keyboard input is also what I was messing with. Underneath here is a bounce, is another. So let's see what's it. So there's a rigid body at the root, but no collider. So if I zoom in here, the green stuff are the colliders. So it looks like we have a big capsule collider kind of aligned with the cart, but above it. That's what this thing is. Then it looks like we have a bunch of small colliders. So if I move down here, underneath the wheel collider group, front left, we have a wheel collider. So it's like the circle. And it looks like there's like a super small sphere right here. So I'm guessing this is a more complicated collider that maybe this thing represents like the dampening, like it's a okay, suspension distance. Okay. So how it kind of mimics like a car wheel with the spring, the suspension spring, what have you. All right, so that's that. So if I jump back out, you can see the four of them in the main capsule collider for, I mean, it's called bouncing capsule, so maybe that's what gives the character. Let me click play real quick. Let me see if the human kind of bounces on the cart a little bit. It's the whole cart that gets us bounciness from it. So I see that the kind of character is this little animation where he stands up when he jumps, so when the cart lands, kind of gets that impact. So maybe the way he's raising and lowering. Pull the game view move. Yeah, it's not really with him. It must be dealing with the bounciness of the cart, just because this big capsule collider doesn't move in the same up and down that the character is doing it. We have the engine audio, so the engine of the car, start, idle, running, drift noise. So all the noise is dealing with the car right here, and this script must determine how to switch between them all. The cart visual, so just the actual cart. It's got an animator. So if I go into window and animation, move this down. So cart idle. So this is the animation of when it's idling. You see it kind of is sputtering, and this look back exhaust is doing a big motion. And that's the only thing. Just plays this idle animation on it. All right. You got the cart body. This is just a so skinned mesh render, different than a mesh render. Skin mesh has to deal with the fact that in some type of content package like Maya or Blender, somebody skinned the mesh to bones and animated the bones. And this is a way to play the animation onto it. So there's a difference between a static mesh render, just a basic piece of geometry, and a skin mesh render, which has a bone system. This root here is usually the bone system. Yep. So these are just locations. It says transforms. These are the bones. So in the game engine, they just look like a whole bunch of locations. But in the content package, it's a hierarchy. I don't know if you can move this while they're skinned. Yeah, you can. So if I, yeah, that's the engine. Oops. But notice as I go under the engine, notice there's no geometry, but the geometry is moving. So this is skinned to this part of the mesh. It's known as like a hard skinning. It's not it's not pulling anything out. It's just moving this engine. It's one to one, and everything else has zero impact by this bone. But if I come up here to cart body, turn it on and off, notice the whole body, everything in orange, including this and this. It's all one big mesh. But notice with the bone system, you can move different parts of it all by itself. So that's the benefit of skinning. Make sure not to save this because I'm just tearing everything apart. So this is the player controller, the character on top. And he's got an animator, and he has a whole bunch. His turn left and turn right. It's going to be the same thing, just opposite. Jump and idle's just always doing that. So turn right. All right. So you have different animations, and you can go into the. This is what the animations are that are capable of being played. If you go into the animator, this controls which animations are being played given the parameters. So driving is default, um, and driving. There's a whole blend tree. Okay, getting complicated. So I was looking at what motion is playing during this state. Um, Here we go. Driving blend tree. Okay. So it's saying we could possibly have three different animations. The player's idle, the player's turning left or turning right. Um, and we can blend between these three based on some type of parameters coming in. So this steering, so we go parameters. This steering is a float. That other code is changing right now to 0. So when it's 0, we're just idle. And when it goes to 1, we turn right and left, the -1 to go left, and everything in between. So this is like coming from that input controller that was mapping to the horizontal axis. So AD and left, right. So this animator has a blend tree in the driving state that lets it blend between three different animations based on user input. And we have these transitions that says condition when grounded is false. It's a bool, true and false. So when we jump, the code is going out and setting this grounded to either true or false, which allows us to transition to the jump state. And the jump state is playing this animation called player jump, right? Which makes him stand up. So a lot of moving part animations can get absolutely crazy. And then the wheels. So now it looks like even the wheel colliders have this wheel collider, which seems to have this dampening, the suspension, a very complicated physics collider. But now there's this idea of the wheel models, and I can see here that they have another collider just for them. They have this capsule collider. So you got a render. I'll probably block it again. Yeah, and the capsule collider down here. All right, so these wheels are not only, I guess they must be governed. Maybe they're not. There's no animator. The code's not turning them straight for code. I'm guessing this collider, this physics collider, is somehow being figured out. This is being driven by the user input and what the cart's doing, and ultimately this collider is just coming along through the physics system to turn. And then helpful divider, we're going to level, so we get the light source, some post processing, so ambient occlusion, bloom. If I turn them off, you can kind of see the effect they're having. Ambient occlusion gets that nice shadows going along little recessed areas, make it look very 3D. And we got the track, the oval track here, right? All the modular parts came from this prefabs down here, all built up oval track. Then there's an additional track out here, which isn't connected for whatever reason, but you can connect them if you want to. and the environment, all the rest of the other parts of this: trees, hills, clouds, stones. Got the horizon. Some of them were built within here. Some of them are prefabs. So this little icon is FBX prefab. These dragged it in. There's a tree grouping, and it has a bunch of FBX files that were brought in. All these trees. Um, Objective time limit. So it's a prefab. It's sitting by the goal. So we have our objectives: reach targets. Let's see, game mode. You have different game modes you can pop in. The target probably is like a tag or a collider or a game object name to search for. It's a checkpoint to know if you crossed it or not. That's a collider. So that's how we know if they hit the checkpoint. So we got 3 checkpoints here that if you go through the checkpoints, then you can change the game objective. All right, so you have the total time that you have to race, 60 seconds, and display messages. Let me just move this stuff over here. Close this out. All right, so notice that display message is saying, select the display message. It's on the same game object, so it's referencing this component. Now, this is saying this is the message that we display. Pass all checkpoints before time runs out. But notice something here. What's the message prefab? Game message generic. What is this? A scriptable object. All right, so this is where these scriptable objects are starting to connect in. It's somehow having to show these messages that maybe they're popping up on the UI, but a lot of the details is being governed. And here's the it is UI. So this is the prefab that they're referencing. Whenever it's a rect transform, it's going to be a UI component. So it's transform, X, Y, Z, all the 3D stuff. Rect transform, rectangle transform. Has to deal with the fact that it's within a 2D space. It's within the UI canvas, and then you have all these anchors and this like positioning gizmos. UIs are really annoying because you have to deal with all these different screen resolutions and how to make everything look nice and form well, no matter what the screen resolution is. So it's a hard. That's why you get these crazy anchors and everything. Anyway, there's a prefab that gets populated up onto the UI through the scriptable object whenever these objectives are met. Then we have the start finish line. This thing right here. It's got a collider. It's a lapped object. It's keeping track of the laps and any details about that. And that wraps up the level. And then we have the game mode. In this case, it has the 3 checkpoints that you got to cross. So there's the first one. You're starting here. Is your start and finish line. So this checkpoint is behind it. So the first you have to cross this checkpoint, then this one, and then this one. You can't just like go in reverse and go this one. That's how they track if you're moving through the race. You have to hit this one, then this one, then that. All right, and that's why these 3 checkpoints are here underneath the game mode. Cool. You have any other questions about the general nature of this um, karting level and what all these parts that came together to make it at a high level? Cool. All right. Well, you're free to go. I was talking with one student. I think not this Wednesday, but the Friday, I'll be covering the platform game So if any of you have any questions or areas of interest, I want to note that next Friday. So yeah, Wednesday I have to think about. That's actually when the deliverables are. So I got to think about that next week. In either case, I'll talk more about next week. Next week. Is there any questions that are worth recording for the class, or I'll just stop the recording?